Hello and welcome to the SnackReads Presents interview series. It is October 8th, 2013, and I'm very privileged today to be here with Jane Lindskold, and we're going to have a good chat.
You bet.
All right. So to start off with, just some general background.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading your bio. You have actually a really thorough bio on your website. I was kind of impressed by that.
It's the background, the academic background. You've got to spell out everything.
Okay. And I thought it was interesting, you very specifically tied, this is the thing in my background and this is how it ties into my writing,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was interesting. A lot of people don't do that. But you came from a big family.
Yes. Big in a couple of sense. I mean, one of 4 siblings, which at the time when I was growing up wasn't that uncommon. These days, you say you have 4 siblings, wow. But my mom was one of 5, my dad was one of 3. I think I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-something first cousins. So that big family dynamic is definitely a part of my life.
Yeah, I grew up with a big extended family, too. And so you... Again, I was reading in your bio where you specifically said you think that the way that affects your writing is that you're very interested in group dynamics.
I am. One of the things that's interesting about a lot of writers is that, to use a psychological term, most of them are isolates in one way or another. They're only children, eldest children, or there's something or another in their life that means they spent some time on their own. They may be a youngest, for example, with a large age gap between them and their next nearest sibling. In my case, I'm an eldest, and although my next closest sibling is about, less than 2 years from me, still, that meant that there was a chunk of probably about 4 years before Anne was available to be anything interesting. And, but then once she was there, she was always there. And my brother is exactly 3 years younger than I am. We were born on the same day, 3 years apart, half an hour apart.
Oh my goodness.
It used to bug me when I was a kid because he was earlier. He was 6 a.m. and I was 6:30 a.m. And I thought since I got up earlier in the morning than him that there should be some coordination between the two. That's what I mean. The defining of self by the group was a real big part of my formative experience. So unlike a lot of writers who are always writing about only children or orphans or whatever, even when I end up writing about somebody who's an orphan or an only child, they end up connected to a larger group. That happened in this book, Child of a Rainless Year.
Okay.
I set out with a character who was not only an only child, but as far as she knew, an orphan. By the end of the book, she's discovered she belongs to this long interconnected family. I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way my brain works. Same thing in the Firekeeper books. Firekeeper is my young woman raised by wolves. She starts out, on one hand, she has a big family, a wolf pack. On the other hand, she's the only human in it. Again, by the end of the series, she knows exactly how she's connected to a whole lot of humans, a whole lot of wolves, and a whole lot of other entities that aren't even human. So yeah, connectedness is a big theme for me.
So you grew up at least part of the time in the D.C. area?
Yeah, Washington, D.C. was my home base. It's on my birth certificate, which has caused me problems, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. When I was in college, I went to college in New York City at Fordham, and my friends loved to tease me about the fact that I was not born in the United States of America, because Washington, D.C. is a federal city. It is not a state. So I put up with that teasing steadily. And then when I was 26, a friend of mine who was a college friend took me to go get my very first driver's license. I had no need to learn to drive earlier. And we get there, and MVD in New York City just has to be seen to be imagined. Probably more people than Albuquerque, standing on line, speaking every language in the globe. I get to the front of my line, the lady looks at my birth certificate and goes, "District of Columbia? District of Columbia?" Ma'am, Washington, D.C., nation's capital? She's ignoring me. Madge, do we take birth certificates from the District of Columbia? And my friend, who had been teasing me for the last, 9 years about not being a citizen again, is just bent over, laughing herself, like...
That's funny, it's not unlike a lot of experiences from New Mexico.
I know, and then I moved to New
else.
Mexico,
Yeah.
the state that everyone says, where are you from? Is it in the United States? Do I need a passport to visit you? Yeah, I seem determined to live where people don't know it's part of the country.
And some of your family members were in politics.
Yeah, my grandfather was governor of Ohio when I was born. In fact, I spent my first Christmas in the governor's mansion in Ohio. I was born in September, so I would have been about a 3-month-old baby, and apparently a bunch of my cousins, that extended family thing again, thought it was a great idea to go play hide and seek and take the baby and hide with her in a closet somewhere. So, large portable doll will scream at command.
Right.
Yeah, so Grandpa was in politics, and then growing up in D.C., we knew a fair number of politicians as just normal people.
So does that seep into your writing?
A lot. I'm really interested in not just politics as a mechanism, but the human aspect, the fact that those are still very human people, and people want to look at them as a king or a president or a Lord High Chancellor of the universe or whatever, and underneath they're very human, very susceptible to flattery, or very susceptible to just plain normal human weaknesses. So intricate politics tends to creep in.
And then something else that must have some effect is that you have a PhD in English.
I do. It's my, I've been looking at that. I realized that was almost half a lifetime ago now. I was 26. On my 26th birthday, I defended my dissertation, which was guaranteed to make it either a very good or a very bad birthday. I basically, when I started my undergrad work, I was torn between journalism, English, and history. And journalism lost because I had a very good professor for the introductory journalism course who made it clear it was all about spin. And that made me excessively uncomfortable, but I could see his point, and I thought, okay, this isn't where I want to go. And then I was torn between English and history, and my mom actually commented that if you are an English major, you get to learn about history in the course of what you're reading. But if you're a history major, eventually you begin to study historiography, the different theories of what makes history work. So I decided English was the best place for me to get everything I wanted. Chance to study writing as a skill, writing as a craft, and also the history that underlies how things work. And it remains a fascination. It hasn't always been great as a writer.
How so?
Well, English professors like inconclusive endings. I think that's because it gives them something to talk about to the students. So I had a real problem with endings when I first started writing. And my first novel, which I didn't bring a copy of, Brother to Dragons, Companion to Owls, the last chapter didn't exist in the earliest version of the book because I ended it at the end. And my editor, John Douglas at Avon Books, basically came back and said, I really liked the book. We had some tinkering he wanted. A good editor usually does. He said, but you need an ending. And I said, what do you mean? Everything that's going on in the book ends. He says, you need closure. I'm like, why? He said, because readers want closure. Of course, coming from the English professor background where closure is the last thing anyone wants, because then what do they talk about with their students? That was a challenge for me. So
you had to unlearn that.
I had to unlearn it. I had to unlearn it, especially for writing books that hopefully would appeal to more than a handful of English professors.
And why did you take it all the way through PhD?
Boy, that's a good question. let me see, if I had stopped at the undergrad, I would have had to teach grammar school. And I'm not unduly fond of grammar school children, though I am more fond now than I was then. My nieces and nephews have done a great job converting me. They're great. So a master's pretty much would have been the same thing. PhD, I could teach college. I actually for a long time wanted to be a research assistant. I just didn't know how impossible it was to find a job as a research assistant, but that would have been ideal for me. Throw me in some dark library and ask me to ferret out the facts behind something. And in a sense, I still get to do a lot of that with what I do now.
Sure.
But yeah, so that's why I took it. It was looking for a compatible job. Because even though I wanted to write, I was very aware that making a living as a writer, especially a full-time writer, is just nearly impossible. So I wanted to find a compatible job slot that I wouldn't hate my life while I was working on writing.
So you had a very realistic outlook on that.
Oh, yeah.
How did you get that realistic outlook? Because I think a lot of people, when you start out something new, you don't necessarily know the realities.
I really think it probably has to do with my parents more than any writer-related thing. My folks, born tail end of the, to be influenced by the Great Depression, they were children then. They were really pretty adamant that we should all look about for jobs when we were getting our education. So that was in my head as that. And also, whether accurately or not, I really don't know because I can't ask him because he's gone now. But I grew up with the impression that my dad possibly would have been happiest staying working in geology, which is what he had his master's in, but had gone into law because it was a better way to make a living. And he managed to combine the two eventually. He worked for the Lands and Natural Resources Division of the Justice Department. And so he was able to be both a geologist. One of the cases he worked in was having to do with the Snake River out here out west. The Snake River was a boundary in a lot of early, land, who owns what side of the Snake River. The Snake River started jumping its boundaries, and there were all sorts of disputes about who owns what now that the river has changed. Is it going to be defined by where the borders used to be, or is it going to be defined by what it says on paper, east bank of the Snake River, etc. So Dad eventually found a way to combine a good way to make a living and something he loved. And I think I was looking for the same thing, a way to make a living and not hate getting up in the morning to do it.
Okay. Then as far as early influences then, there was a particular writer who was a big influence.
Yeah, Roger Zelazny. How I Met Roger is one of those fairy tale stories that just doesn't happen and no one believes it. So, people do believe it because it really happened, but it's not the kind of thing you count on.
If you wrote it in a story, you'd be like, oh, that's a formulaic.
Yeah, the editor would say, excuse me, can we find a less whatever? I did want to write fiction even while I was working on my various degrees. And in fact, I did scribble fiction on the side even when I was working on it. Right about the time I was finishing my PhD, I went into a bookstore in Queens, New York, and on the shelf were some choose-your-own adventure novels set in Roger's Amber universe. And I'll admit, I looked at them and I thought, I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer since I was 18. I looked at them and I thought, well, this is lowest common denominator. I guess he doesn't really care that much about his material. I've always had a pretty good idea for some other novels set in the Amber universe. Maybe I'll just go ahead and write him. I mean, if he's letting them do, for God's sake, choose your own adventure thing, maybe he'll let someone else do something with some more quality to it. Well, so I wrote a very nice, polite letter, and I, to my surprise, actually got a response, a little scribbled postcard, basically saying, I actually do have other plans, but thank you very much for inquiring. And I thought about it, and I kind of thought about framing it, and I still have it in fact. And after a couple of days, I thought, well, he was kind enough to write me. I should write him a thank you. So I wrote him a thank you. He sent me back another postcard. I wrote him back. And it became a regular correspondence that went on for several months and was a pretty cool thing, having just finished or finishing up a PhD in English, to be corresponding with a real live living breathing author whose work I had admired for a long time,
Right.
read voraciously. And then a friend of mine, in fact, he's a newly just published his own first solo novel, Chuck Gannon, Charles E. Gannon, just published Fire with Fire from Bain Books. But Chuck was in my gaming group, and he came down one week and said, hey, this came across my desk. That author who's been nice enough to answer a couple of your letters is going to be at a conference. Why don't we all go? So we all saddled up. It turned out not to be a conference, but a science fiction convention. And I'd never been to a science fiction convention. I had no idea what to expect with a science fiction convention.
Not exactly an academic conference.
Not exactly an academic conference. So I come walking in the side door with my buds. And the first thing I see are two very nice young ladies, wearing nothing but fur bikinis and live ferrets. And I was about to spin on my heel and walk out, but the guys, all my buds who I was with were guys, and they thought young ladies in fur bikinis and ferrets was a pretty good way to spend a weekend. So we went on, and I went to, the public talks and stuff, and then there was a big reception, standing in line. I've got to backtrack here. When I decided to go to this convention with my friends, I had sent Roger a note saying, I'm going to go.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like, I'll come up and introduce myself. If not, you've been so kind to answer my letters, I'll stay out of your hair. Well, I didn't get an answer. So I figured I'd go. I watched. The day before we're going, a little plastic bag shows up in my apartment house mailbox with a shredded piece of paper inside that, when I taped it together, was a scrawled note from Roger Zelazny saying, I'd be delighted to meet you. In all the years of correspondence, we corresponded from roughly 1989 till I moved out here in 1994, that was the only letter that ever got lost or almost lost. Like I said, so put it in a novel and the editor is going to say, this is really contrived! But it's what happened. I can show you the taped together note. So I thought, okay, now I can't get off the hook. I've actually got to go and say hello. So I got on the line in this big twisting ballroom with people with their books clutched in their hands. And I get up to the front, and the first thing Roger looks at is my hands, because that's what people have been doing. They've been handing in books.
Right.
And I said, Mr. Zelazny, I didn't know how to say his name. I'm Jane Lindskold. And his face just lit up, and he said, oh, you came! And, we shook hands and chatted for a few moments, and then it was time to move on to the next person. But he said, stay, I want to talk to you some more. And then, but he had this long line of people. So he finally climbed up on a chair. Roger, if you read things about Roger, they always talk about how shy he was. He was, but not really. If he wanted to, he could go extrovert with the best of them. And in this particular case, he climbed up on the chair next to him and hollered for the person and that he needed, and they came over, and he said, where and when tonight is the party that Kay and Kirby are throwing? That was his agent. And because I want my friend to come. And so the friend told him, and he told me, and I went my way. And then that night we went to the agent's party. I was married to someone else at the time, and he came along, and we went to the party. And basically Roger and I found out that the tentative friendship we'd forged in letters was definitely, there was something there. And so after that, going back to the influence on writing, we started exchanging letters really talking about life in general, but also about a lot about writing, because he was just in love with the craft, in the same way I'm in love with the craft. So we had that in common. We also found out both of us had come to science fiction and fantasy in the same way, through mythology and folklore, rather than through an interest in science, though we both had that. So there was just this chemistry there, and it percolated, but we talked a lot. Oddly enough, he never tried to teach me how to be a writer. He would go out of his way to, like, he read some of my early efforts, and he never told me, do this. He would tell me, don't do this. You know, like the common beginning writer's error of main characters who are a little too perfect. You know, things like that. Or have things come to them a little too easily. But he told me later on that he felt I already had 90% of what I needed, and he didn't want to color in the lines for me. He wanted to watch me color in the lines myself. So he was a major influence in a lot of ways, but very little direct. He never took a manuscript from my hands and marked it up to show me how to do it differently, or even offered the same level of feedback that most people typically get from a writer's group. He taught me a lot about the business. We talked a lot about different philosophies of character development, story development, but it was never, I do it this way and you should do it this way too. So kind of a different approach.